Thank you to CRAACO for inviting us to this panel, and we're real proud to be one of the executive sponsors for this year and excited to be talking to you about something that's really core to the mission of CRAACO, which is how do we get healthcare and clinical research better connected. And so our presentation is a little bit about how diverse community-based hospitals are a lifeline to saving clinical research. So I'm John Potthoff. I'm the CEO of Elligo Health Research, and real excited to be here today. And I want to let Christy introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Christy Dueck. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for Clinical Research and Real-World Data at Cerner Corporation. For those of you that may not be familiar with Cerner, we are one of the world's largest healthcare and information technology companies. We specialize in patient care and the EHR, and are very happy to be in collaboration with Elligo and sharing how we really view our opportunity to disrupt clinical research today.
So yes, thanks for having us. And we're going to talk a little bit about how our model of collaboration allows us to decentralize clinical research into healthcare. And, we want to make this interactive and allow some time for questions and discussion as we move through. But I think the first question is, when we talk about saving clinical research, saving it from what? What do we really mean by this? And I think it's really getting down to the core of the meeting, which is to try to help figure out how to save the industry from lack of patient and physician participation, and also the resulting lack of diversity in participation in clinical trials. So being able to talk about those issues. We know that less than 3%, plus or minus, depending on which study you look at, of patients and physicians participate in clinical trials. And when we talk to physicians in healthcare about why they don't participate in clinical trials, their number one answers are always administrative in nature, ranging from I don't know how to find a trial to I don't know how to do the regulatory documentation or whatever, but they don't say that they're not interested in working on clinical trials. And so we also know that our industry is very focused on the professional conduct of clinical trials, and that healthcare is a much bigger industry with a whole separate infrastructure. And so today, most of what we do is try to adapt research, clinical trials into professional centers and academic research centers, and really haven't spent a lot of time of organizing around reversing that and trying to look at how do we put research into healthcare and taking the lead from healthcare. So that's one of the issues that has limited access to patient populations. Lack of diversity has been an ongoing issue in our industry and really highlighted, I think, very publicly with the COVID-19 vaccine trials. And so it's another area that we desperately need to do better. And we believe that one of the solutions is getting closer into healthcare. And then also something that we struggle with all the time is missed deadlines. And we know that clinical trials are not getting shorter in timeline around patient enrollment and participation. And when you have 80 to 85% of trials missing their timelines, we know that we have some difficulties with there. So there's really difficult when we can lock a database in a day, but yet we have ever extending enrollment timelines. So as we go on to the next slide, Christy is going to talk a little bit about what about, when you access patients through healthcare, what does that do for diversity in clinical trials?
Thanks, John. And John did a really good setup of the problem statement, right? Which is at the end of the day, it takes too long, it costs too much, and only a teeny tiny fraction of physicians and patients are involved in clinical research and the clinical drug development process. So what better place to start than one of the world's largest EHR companies to really hone in on that cross point between clinical care and clinical research? So what Cerner's done to approach this is create a partnership really with our health system clients called the Learning Health Network. And it's really an agreement for those clients that are passionate and interested in starting to participate in research and may have a robust research opportunity or maybe starting from the zero ground. But it's contributing de-identified, site-anonymized data into Cerner's real-world data set, and basically creating a network of research-enabled sites who are ready to deploy a clinical trial or participate in clinical studies. So the Learning Health Network today contains 61 health systems across 38 states in the US, equating about 1,200 different sites. That represents over 92 million patients in our real-world data set. As John said, diversity is really the key point here. We were very, very intentional in targeting health systems within Cerner's client base who are not just the large academic centers, but who are also regional leaders and rural centers, so that we've got populations that now match what the US looks like across the entire country itself. And so that way we are able to create a data set that has rural representation that matches gender and ethnicities across the US population in a very, very concise way, and different than what we've seen historically in the way that clinical trials have been done. So to John's point, our efforts here are to engage the 97%, and that's what our collaboration with Elligo is all about. This is my favorite slide, John, but I'll let you go.
Yes, thanks. And as Christy said, what's really exciting is when we look at healthcare and the clinical trial market. And there's a lot of ways to really think about what we're really talking about. And here you see sort of the scale of patients accessible through traditional research sites and their catchment areas versus trials conducted through healthcare and the abundance of patients that are there. Clinical research has operated for quite a while under a method and approach that patients are more of a scarce resource for clinical trials, and that we have to find them and recruit them and figure out how to get them into clinical trial centers, and which is all true. And when we really reverse the equation and start to look at where are the patients today, they're in healthcare. And there's a lot of ways to look at it. When you talk about the 97% of patients and physicians don't participate, you can also look at the economic size of the two areas. Whereas the clinical trial industry is anywhere around $100 billion a year in the US alone, healthcare is a $4 trillion industry a year. So when we look at just the economics and the infrastructure and the sources that are applied to both of those, you're going to see a lot more opportunity within healthcare in a very heterogeneous way that requires us to really navigate and to get into that. So as Christy says, patients and Cerner and accessing huge volumes of patients and their data is really the accelerant to clinical trials. And what we're trying to be is the enabler to make that so that those patients anywhere, any place that are found within these systems can participate in a clinical trial. So we then get into the big question of how do we do that and how do we access them? So a little bit here on working together and looking at how do we have a model that starts with healthcare in the middle when we're looking at decentralizing a trial into healthcare is to start with the data. It's to start with that abundance of resources here in the middle where we have plenty of patients and plenty of physicians who are more than capable of conducting clinical trials and be able to get out into a model where we're accessing patients first and creating a more flexible, scalable model where we're not limited by choosing 10 or 20 or 100 research sites only, and having constraints, whether that be the number of exam rooms available or staff or equipment, and trying to make sure that we can access enough patients in real time to be able to enroll the trial more conveniently. And what we mean by convenience is that patients are there with their own physicians. They're part of a network of healthcare so that we can reach out and help them navigate through the clinical trial in a system that they're already part of, already trust, and hopefully working with healthcare collaborators that they also have relationship with. And because we have the ability to reach out into abundance and really accelerate clinical trials, we can do so in a more controlled way, where we can start earlier, really design the access into healthcare, which is a heterogeneous population of systems that we need to recruit and do in different ways in order to then engage those patients in a more timely way and to really just get access to them out into the real world, which will drive better outcomes for us. So we want to really stay core at maintaining a patient-physician dyad as a collaboration so that we're not trying to redirect patients into more unknown situations than they're already encountering in a clinical trial, as well as maintain current regulatory processes so that we're running clinical trials in accordance with today's regulations, even with a central PI, but working with our collaborators in the field as sub-investigators in order to allow us to conduct the trial just like we would any other trial. But really just starting with the patients at the beginning and reaching out to them. So in summary, Christy, do you want to tie up on abundance of resources?
Sure. So I think that, to bring this concept to life, let's talk through a real example. So one of the things that we often see, right, is the start with a sponsor and a need for a specific patient cohort to match the inclusion criteria for their trial. In this new model, where we put this at the center of healthcare and running that through a network like the Cerner Learning Health Network, we can find in a matter of hours or a day how many of our 92 million patients actually meet that inclusion criteria. And that's that abundance of resources that John's talking about, where we're not starting with that same list of sites in a very manual process. But as I said, in a matter of hours or days, very quickly finding that while we may be only looking for 500 patients, we've got 57,000 patients in our Learning Health Network that actually meet that inclusion criteria. And then working directly with those health systems or hospitals that are already research enabled to start to engage with their patients directly.
Yes, and because we're starting with sort of the patient first and using the data and such large numbers of the data, we can really start with a data-based enrollment strategy so that we can change our thinking from one of setting up a process to intercept patients in a scarcity model and really reconfigure that into one of abundance, where we really design access into healthcare that meets the needs of the trial, and that we really look into not only the numbers of the patients, but where they are. And it's always interesting to me when we look at a health system or a hospital or a practice is, patients aren't evenly distributed. Certain physicians will specialize, or all the Crohn's patients will be with one physician. So it's very helpful for us to really look out and see where are those relationships today, and to try to really keep those patients with their physicians to really build this out. And at the end is to execute clinical trials faster. We really think that by accessing the abundance of healthcare and by doing trials out there with all these patients, that we're able to enroll trials up to 10 times faster than traditionally, really because the patients are there. It's really about designing how we decentralize the research infrastructure into healthcare in order to make it possible for any patient anywhere to participate in clinical trials. Because we think that not only should vaccines be developed at warp speed and really accelerated, but why not everything? Why aren't we really tapping into this whole infrastructure that's available to us to move trials faster? So that's what we've collaborated to do and are really interested in continuing to build out that access and have more trials execute faster. So any last words, Christy, or we can open up and see if there's any questions. I know we only have a couple minutes left.
I would just highlight what you said again, John. It's a really important point, and it's somewhat of the silver lining of COVID, right? Which is it demonstrated to all of us that it doesn't have to take 17 years to go from molecule to medicine at the bedside. We did it in 12 months. And to your point, shouldn't every patient or every therapeutic area have that same level of speed and efficiency? So this is our call to action. If you're a health system and you're interested in this new world of clinical care and clinical research, reach out to us. If you're in industry and interested around running a trial through this new model, reach out to us. As John said, this is not aspirational. We're doing this today, and we're really excited to share the concept with you.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if we have any questions. I'm not sure I'm understanding how to use the Q&A and the polls, but perhaps not. But we have I think we have exactly a minute left. If I look at
and John, it looks like we've got one question. Okay. So earlier today, we heard a lot about trust issues with patients. You clearly have great access to patients. How do you build trust with them?
Well, from my perspective, I think one of the biggest issues is by maintaining that current community of care around the patient. We think that there's no better way for a patient to participate in a trial than with their own physician that they already have that established relationship with, that practice, and that infrastructure that's there. And so by making it more capable for those people to participate in clinical trials and getting into these settings, is not only does it help with having more trust, but it also helps us to have more diverse participation in clinical trials. Simply by getting closer in part of healthcare, especially as Christy mentioned, when we're working in a variety of settings, we get much more diversity in our trials. About 31% of our patients are diverse in clinical trials. And it's not just ethnic diversity. We're also looking at healthcare system diversity, urban, rural, big city, small city, types of settings, and trying to get a really representative sample across the whole industry.
And then I would jump in on that from the health system side, because we've seen a similar concern around the issue of trust and what are you going to do with our patients and our health system's data. And that's front and center for us in ensuring that we are absolutely good stewards of that data, and have gone so far with the Learning Health Network to have a client-led governance council that absolutely reviews and ensures that every use case for that data is for good science and good medicine. So top of mind for our health systems as well as for our patients, that level of trust is there. Hey, John, it looks like number 2. Did you see that question?
Yeah, I see a question from my friend Jennifer Byrne asking, what was the single biggest challenge and the single biggest success? Well, the single biggest challenge, I think, was all of it. But really, I think it was really around, the two worlds of healthcare and research have evolved in very parallel but different ways in trying to build that bridge and into from research, which is very controlled and regulated, into healthcare, which is very big and differentiated. And I think the biggest success has been being able to really connect to the, to really get to that stage where we have an abundance of ability to really draw upon a huge population of patients. I don't know, Christy, what you would say for your thoughts on that.
Gosh, I would say, it's actually how taking the first step was the biggest challenge, right? Getting health systems on board with this concept of we can actually bring clinical research into the venue of clinical care. And there's a way to both accelerate and, through our collaboration with Elligo, activate. So taking that first step down the research path doesn't have to be so scary. And this is a win for everybody to get innovative therapeutics into the hands of patients a whole lot more quickly.